Welcome to the Rum Revival. My name's Arminder, and I realized that I haven't yet done a video dedicated to a Foursquare Exceptional Cask Selection rum release. I've mentioned them in my new release videos over the last couple months, but I've never really done a deep dive into any one of them. Well, all that changes today with the newly released Equipoise. Now, since it's the first time I'm diving into a rum in the series, I figured I'd first provide an overview of the series and then dive into this specific release. Now, if you're not familiar, the Exceptional Cask Selection series, or ECS for short, is the high-end range of rums produced by Foursquare Rum Distillery in Barbados. Now, while the first release in the series came out in 2008, it would be another 6 years in 2014 when the second release came out, and starting from there, about 2 to 3 rums are released every year in the series. Now, to date, with the launch of the Equipoise, 25 rums have been released in the series. Now, before I break down the differences between the releases, let's talk about the similarities. Each release is a molasses-based blend of double retort pot still rums and twin column coffee still rums. Those rums are blended together after distillation and then put into barrels where they are fully tropically aged in Barbados. Each release is additive-free with no color, no sugar added, and no chill filtration, and that's kind of the baseline. So of course the question is, how do they differ? Well, it's primarily around aging. At the highest level, each release falls into one of two categories. Either it's aged fully in ex-bourbon casks, or it's a blend of ex-bourbon casks and some other cask type or types. Let's focus on the ex-bourbon releases first. Within that broad category, it's further split into two subcategories. There are vintage releases where all the rums in the release were distilled in a specific year. It's pretty apparent as the year of distillation is also the name of the rum. For example, the latest vintage release, the 2011, is in fact titled 2011 and all the rums in it were distilled in 2011. Now, with the exception of the first two, each vintage release is aged 12 years in ex-bourbon casks and has been released at either 59 or 60% ABV. You can expect to see one vintage release every year. Now, the other subcategory of all bourbon aging releases are the non-vintage releases. Now, we've had 4 to date, and they all seem to be bottled around 58% ABV, and each one has been aged progressively longer, with the latest release, Covenant, having been aged 18 years. Now, one quick way of identifying these rums is that the name of the rum on the label is actually in purple letters. Now, the second high-level broad category after all that ex-bourbon releases are rums that have been aged initially some amount of time in ex-bourbon casks, and then they've been moved over to some other cask type or types for further aging. Now, some folks might call that finishing, but Foursquare calls it double maturation, as finishing tends to be a handful of months, maybe up to a year and some change. These tend to be aged in those additional cask types anywhere from 2 to 9 years. And at that point, finishing doesn't seem quite the right word to use, hence the use of double maturation. To date, the secondary cask types have included port, Zinfandel, Madeira, sherry, cognac, and calvados casks. Now, this double maturation category can be split into two subcategories based on their ABV. There are lower proof ones, mostly under 50% ABV, and then there are higher proof ones that are typically high 50s or low 60s. One quick way to tell them apart is by the color of the name of the rum on the label. If it's in red letters, then it's one of the lower proof releases, and then if it's in green or blue letters, then it's one of the higher proof releases. Now, what's the difference between the green releases and the blue releases? Hell if I know. I've tried looking into it and figuring out what the differences are, and I cannot figure it out for the life of me. Now, as you've probably already seen, the non-vintage releases have all sorts of interesting names for these rums. Words like dominus, emprise, sagacity, nobiliary, detente, redoubtable, shibboleth, indelible, sovereignty, autonomy, touchstone, covenant, equipoise, and the yet-to-be-released magisterium. Now, obviously, these are some pretty interesting words with some pretty interesting definitions, and I think they're worth looking up. Who says drinking can't be educational? All right, so enough about the series. Let's talk about this rum right here. So Equipoise is the 25th release in the series, and it's easy to tell because on the label, each release has a mark number in Roman numerals. Here we've got mark XXV, or 25, so it's the 25th release. Now, in terms of what Equipoise means, it means a state of balance. It's also the name of a steroid used for horses that apparently bodybuilders use as well. Yeah, if you search for Equipoise on YouTube, you'll find stuff like this. Yeah, this one is my absolute favorite. What is going on with this? As always, this is a molasses-based blend of pot and column rums. It's actually a blend of two rums. The first was aged 14 years entirely in ex-bourbon casks, and the second was aged first 10 years in ex-bourbon, and then another 4 in ex-calvados casks. Now, if you're not familiar, Calvados is an apple brandy made in the Normandy region of France. Now, those two rums are blended together and bottled at 61% ABV with no additives, no sweeteners, and no filtration, and is priced at $145. All right, let's give it a try. So initially on the nose, I get a good amount of brown sugar and caramel. There's also some baking spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. There's even a little bit of citrus, but I'm also picking up some stone fruit. In a way, it's almost like a caramelized slice of plum or peach. Now, typically when I'm trying a rum for the very first time, and especially when I'm doing a review on it, I try to avoid other reviews and other tasting notes, and that's because I don't want them to influence me, right? But I actually did read a tasting note on the aroma of this rum a while back, and it stuck with me, and the first time I smelled this rum, I totally got it. I don't know if I would have gotten it if I hadn't read it, but basically, I totally get this note of olive oil. Like olive oil that maybe is like kind of rubbed into like a little bit of leather. All right, let's give it a taste. All right, so up front, the first thing I notice is a little bit of soft vanilla and caramel. And then there's some fruits, primarily plums and a little bit of raisins. And there is also a strong amount of baking spices, but it's not really cinnamon. It's more like strong amount of nutmeg and a strong amount of cloves. And there's even like a little bit of hint of dark chocolate as well. And on the finish, maybe I get a little bit of like tobacco and black pepper. Now, to be honest with you, it took me a long time to get those tasting notes. I had to drink a lot of this rum to really parse those out. All those flavors were packed together pretty tight. Like there wasn't really any breathing room between all those notes, which is the thing that I've noticed with most of the 60% or higher ECS releases. I found that you really need to let them sit for a very long time or to add some water to kind of really get any sense of the rum. I mean, that just might be me. So I know plenty of people who will really enjoy this rum neat. And while I do like it neat and I appreciate it neat, I don't think I'm in love with it neat. This just feels a little, I don't know, like a little uptight, you know, and it kind of needs to just relax a little bit, you know? And that's what I did. I drank a lot of this rum neat to kind of figure out those flavor profiles. And then I figured, okay, let's switch tactics here and let's try it with some water. And that's actually a bit of a rarity for me, though I've started making an exception with the Exceptional Cask Selection releases, pun intended. The water I found just kind of helps uncoil the rums, kind of spaces out the flavors, and just makes them a little bit more enjoyable for me. So let's do that. Let's add some water. Yeah, on the nose now, I'm getting a lot of stone fruit. I'm getting a lot of plums, a little bit of cherry, and actually a good amount of chocolate as well. Oh yeah, now we're talking. So that vanilla and caramel that I was getting while drinking it neat, that was all up front initially. But now with some water, it's running across the entire palate. The rum just feels lusher, a touch sweeter, and the plum and the raisins that I was getting are totally amped up now. And I'm even getting a little bit of apple cider. Now all that sweetness and fruitiness though, they're being kept in check by a rounder, fuller clove note. It's less of a sharp, dry clove note and more of like a robust one. Now with some water, this is a rum that I can get really excited about. It's tasty and it's just more drinkable and more relaxed. Now of course I had to also try it in a rum old fashioned. And honestly, this might be my favorite way of drinking the rum. Honestly now with that demerara syrup, the bitters, that dilution, it's pretty damn delicious. There's so much more like lush plum on the palate and much more of a stronger apple cider note. It kind of evokes like a chai spiced caramel apple cider. And you could even say it's a little bit of an apple pie with a cinnamon clove caramel drizzle on top of it. And at this point, you might as well top it off with a little bit of vanilla ice cream. This is super tasty and delicious and definitely something I would drink a lot of in the fall. Middle of the summer, maybe not always, but in the fall time, oh yeah, I'm drinking a lot of these. All right, so that's how I feel about Equipoise, but how does it compare to some of the other ECS releases? Well, all I have on hand are two bottles. I have the Touchstone, which is aged partially in ex-cognac cask, and then I have the 2010 release. I did a blind tasting of all three, and the Equipoise was by far my favorite. And yes, there are many other ECS releases that I think were amazing over the years, that I have really strong feelings about, that I think were 10 out of 10s, that I have these really nostalgic feelings about, but you can't really compare a nostalgic feeling against an actual rum. Like, those aren't apple to apples comparisons, right? So I think if you've never had an ECS bottle and you're looking to get one, this is a great one to start on. Great, complex, flavorful, with some water, phenomenal old-fashioned. This is a good one. But that being said, at a high level, with all the ECS series, I don't feel like you need more than 1 or 2 bottles at any given time. If you've got 1 or 2, I don't feel like you need to run out and get this. While I like this a lot, it's not like a complete like 180 compared to these ones or any other rums in the series. Generally speaking, they're all good to great, right? And they're all really well made. And yeah, I know I didn't really listen to my own advice, but starting from now, I'm not going to buy any more bottles of the ECSs until I've finished at least 2 of these. I mean, unless, of course, they release one aged in, I don't know, like a hot sauce cask or something like that. I mean, if you really want a rating from me, I think drinking it neat, it's like a 7.5. With some water, it's an 8. And then in a rum old fashioned, it's an 8.5. You know, whatever that means. Of course, there's the question of, is it worth $145? And look, we're talking about 14 years of tropical aging and 61% ABV, and that's not gonna come cheap. What else can you get for that price? Well, Appleton 21 is around there, but that's 21 years of aging, so it's a lot more than 14 years of aging, but it's only like around 43% ABV, I think, and this is 61% ABV. I'd much rather drink this instead. Then there's the Worthy Park Single Estate 12 year. That's 12 years of aging, which is fairly close to this. It's bottled around 54, 55% ABV, and I really like that rum, and honestly, I really like this, and I feel like those two are relatively comparable. But those are sort of apples to oranges. That's a Barbados rum, that's a Jamaican rum. So if we want to do sort of an apples to apples, let's talk other Barbados rums, and really we have to talk about the Mount Gay Master Blenders Collection. Those rums are around $250 to $350, but they're usually bottled at like mid to high 40% ABV. And at that rate, honestly, this is such a better deal. Frankly, not just the Equipoise, any ECS bottling is so much better of a deal. So when you put it in that context, I think the price could be justified. That being said, $145 is $145. Can you get some really good rums for less? Yes, of course you can. But that's not denying that this is really high quality rum. So there you go, that is my overview on the Exceptional Cask Selection series and my thoughts on the Equipoise. Now I'm very curious, do you have a favorite ECS release? If so, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're interested in checking out some exclusive behind the scenes content and first impressions videos where I try a rum for the very first time and give you my gut reaction to it, then consider checking out and supporting me on my Patreon. I have tons of content there that I think you'll really like. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you next time. Cheers. Hey, so I was just editing this video when I realized that not once in the video did I mention Richard Seale. Not in this video or in my video from a few weeks back on Old Brigand. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of that actually. Now, if you're not familiar, Richard is the master distiller and master blender at Foursquare. He's basically Mr. Foursquare. I do wonder, do you think Richard is watching right now? Just in case if he is, hey Richard, how's it going? You might not remember me, but we actually met on a hot and crowded dance floor in London last year. That is totally a true story, absolutely. He probably doesn't remember me, but we met on a hot, crowded dance floor, for sure. I don't think either one of us actually really wanted to be there, but there we were. That's it, end of story.